trying to fill the room here. We're in the early 1900s, 1920, I call them the formative years of power and politics. You had Drainage by Counties Acts and Land Reclamation. You had the Everglades title. Now, I have that up there because 1903, the title from 1850 was finalized. So when we criticize people today for taking so damn long, that took 53 years to finalize the title from the 1850 Everglades EAA Act. So that was finalized. And the state believed, and if they didn't believe it, the Supreme Court pounded it into their head when Voss sued them for misappropriation, that their obligation was to drain the wetlands for cultivation and settlement, or as I say, habitation and cultivation. That was their charge, was to drain that land.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
How did the Spanish grants fit into all this? Like the extensive development? How did they play into any of this?
That I'd have to research. Okay. Well, Broward, when we start talking about Broward, he was a player around that whole period of time, at times to the dismay of the Spanish government. But, you know, Ed asked me a question earlier that I've got to get re-educated on, and I will re-educate myself on that as well. Okay. So thank you. These are the big three. If you talk about drainage in Florida and Everglades restoration and basically the statewide water management district system that is in place today, these were the three guys that did it. Bluxom so strongly influenced William Sherman Jennings and Napoleon Bonaparte Broward in this regard. These guys were peas in the pod. They were, as we say today, they were bros. Okay. You had the Broward area. Well, Governor Jennings, let me go back and just talk a little bit about him. He was the primary designer of the Everglades Drainage District. He took all the work that the Corps did. He introduced and had extensive surveys done, and he started critical data collection. He started building a historic database to formulate the plan. Later on, post-governorship, he was special counsel to TIF, and then he was also a chief spokesman for a gentleman named Richard Bowles in the land development in Henry, Western Palm Beach County, now associated with Bowles Canal. Okay. And then we'll talk about Broward, one of my favorites. Okay. Broward was, I would like to hang out with Broward when I had long hair motorcycles. He amazingly, for a guy that only was in office for 4 years, they say he had as much recognition in the state as Claude Mallard, because of they actually called his period the Broward period or Browardism. He was a riverboat captain, a pilot, he was a sheriff, he was a gun runner. Spain had a hit out on him because he was running guns in Cuba. He basically established the citrus industry. He brought government and public agencies into water and land management in the 1900s. His vision is a vision that you see today, coupled with Bluxam and Jennings. His primary developmental focus at the time, naturally, was Miami and Fort Lauderdale. He created the Board of Drainage Commissioners. Kind of like the Water Management District today, he created a statewide commission of drainage commissioners made up of the governor, controller, treasurer, attorney general, and the ag commission. Remember, I told you the importance of these positions. Okay? He thought the railroads were too dominant. He was smart enough to realize that he needed people like Flagler as a political ally, but he also did not like the way that they were controlling the state, and particularly the elections. Right? So so what they did was they created the Board of Drainage Commissioners, and as a result, they determined they were levy a yearly drainage tax of 10 cents an acre. Never distant only paid a quarter, and have rights of eminent domain. So this basically, when you think of the 5 water management districts today, and some of us still remember when there was talk maybe in the 90s or 80s about a super board of water management districts, okay? Mike's shaking his head, he remembers. This was it. Okay. And we're in 1905. There was one problem. The U.S. Supreme Court said that the board wasn't authorized by the state constitution. So what they did, cleverly, was they amended it to only address the Everglades drainage district, okay, or the Everglades area, the 4.3 million acres there that you see. So basically, in 1907, the first drainage district, okay, one of the first, there were some remnants, was created by the state of Florida, the Everglades Drainage District. And they had the right to levy a tax of 5 cents an acre per year, authorized to issue bonds, was only responsible for the area noted in that 60 mile by 150 corridor assortment of land. So that was it. So now you start, okay, so I want you, when we get into phase 2, I'm going to be talking about things in the 1960s and 1970s that are rooted in this. When Walt Disney came to Orlando in 1961 and started laying out Disney World, they used this basis to establish Reedy Creek. It's just amazing the vision that some of these guys have. Plus, Ryder was a badass. I mean, let's not get around the fact that he was a bad dude. So here we are. So the other things that he did, he created primary election law. Remember I told you he did not like the way the railroads were controlling the elections, and the railroads controlled the election. So he created that. He gave Henry what he wanted. The insanity grounds for divorce. He did give him that. He was close buds with Roosevelt. He actually got federal money into the state. Now, federal was not into flood control at this time. They were into navigation. So he got him into the state under the auspices of navigational improvements for the benefit of the state, transportation, tourism, etc. He lays the groundwork for the drainage district. He had the vision of the statewide system. And he creates the Florida Everglades Engineering Commission. And the first project that they take on under the Everglades Drainage District auspices is to put a canal from Lake O to the ocean called the Jackie Thurlow Canal. No. Called the St. Lucie Canal. Yeah. So they're talking about one of my friends, there's side discussion over there. Do you have a place we can put Zork so he's not in there?
He's welcome anywhere.
Well, Broward was spending money like a crazy man. I mean, he was spending money he didn't have. He spent money he didn't have. So he said, man, I need to come up with some fast change. So he gets a hold of a guy named Richard Bowles. And he says, how about we sell you 1 million acres for a couple bucks an acre in western Palm Beach, Henry County, the home of Bowles and Cross Canal today. Okay? And what's ironic is when I was at the Flood Control and Water Management District for almost 30 years, I worked on the Bowles Canal. They just announced that they're going to be working on the Bowles Canal, and I just say bring a lot of dynamite. So the Bowles and the Cross Canal were named, Bowles after them, still working on it today. He was instrumental in ponying up $1 million and helping Broward reduce some of his outstanding expenditures. Okay. Here's my favorite guy, James O. Wright. Who's that? James O. Wright, to me, personally, is the most influential engineer in the state of Florida. Now, Ben Hur, H-E-R-R, is rumored to have a PE number in the single digits, was the engineer for the Okeechobee Flood Control District in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. And I had the pleasure of working with Bill Starch, Zeb Grant, true pioneers in water engineering in the state of Florida. James O. Wright is the guy. And what is so special? Broward went to the USDA, I believe, and borrowed James O. Wright, a federal engineer from USDA. And I could see these guys out on the levee. Big Broward, with his reputation, got his arm around J.O. and he said, J.O., what do you think, man? Could we drain this? Yeah, boss, I think we can do this. No problem. Yeah, I like your thinking. So James Wright puts out a brochure or a report and basically says this is no problem. Draining Everglades is no problem. Okay? A couple things wrong with the work. One of the supervisors didn't see it and approve it, and two, he kind of estimated that the average monthly rainfall in the summer months was 4 inches.
Oh my gosh.
So before anybody here says that Wright was wrong. Okay? But he wasn't wrong in the eyes of some of the politicians. So they published his report. Okay? The state did. Every real estate developer took that report and put it in their glosses. You know, federal engineer James Wright says this place is great. Okay? Duncan Fletcher, in Senate Document 80, wanted to make the Wright report the official document. And Duncan Fletcher was a senator, U.S. senator, 30 years. That's how hell-bent they were on developing this land. Okay? So when I say he was the most influential engineer in the state of Florida, for all the wrong reasons, but he influenced what happened at that boom that you had in that period of time in these areas. So what you have there is you have some of Wright's documents, you have a canal law in 1915, and you have a dredging of the Everglades Drainage District. So yeah, the real estate brochures took that. Okay. Now we have Broward and William Jennings. They were buds. What you have there is a picture of them and their lobbying efforts. I think probably right after Broward left office. They actually were hired by Bowles to promote land development. Who better to go out and tell you that this is a great place to habitate than Governor Broward? And then there's a tour bus, not a tour bus, that's a real estate development bus in Hialeah in 1921. So many of us remember the $10 down, $10 a month. Here's some free orange juice deals in the 50s and 60s. This was the deal back then, and they were promoting it. And Broward and Henry. He really did like Henry, but he knew he needed Henry. Broward had visions of being a vice president candidate with William Jennings Bryan on that ticket, and then he was dumped for a Midwesterner. But he had visions. He also had his eye on the U.S. Senate seat. So he gave Henry what he wanted. Henry wanted to marry Lily. So many of you are familiar with the Flagler Museum in Palm Beach. Well, my wife's family owned that land. They had a mercantile store over there. In that area was commonly referred to as Shantytown. And it was where the domestics lived, and they rode across the Lake Worth water body and took care of the homes on the western shore of Lake Worth. My wife's grandmother rented tents to the tourists down there. I have the Florida abstract title between her family and Henry Flagler and Mary Leland. I've got to get this to the Historic Society. There's a section on her family down there, but I just thought it was cool. So basically, this is transferring land in downtown Clematis to her family in exchange for that. And you know, mysteriously, when Flagler came, Shantytown burned down. He had brought the circus into to West Palm in the area of Rosemary and Sapodilla. And basically, when the domestics had no home to go back to in Shantytown, he encouraged them to live in the tent city. So the roots of some of the African American culture in the West Palm Beach area are rooted in the tent city. Barbara wanted me to make sure you understood she had nothing to do with burning Shantytown down.
I'd like to correct that.
Okay, moving right along, hopefully. So the Everglades Drainage District began work in 1906, and by 1928, they had accomplished a 5-major system, and by 1931, they got the bowls and the cross canal done. And basically that's what they had. They had about $18 million tied up. You got to remember what was important during that time, just regressing just a tad.